Alrighty, welcome everybody back to the channel. If you don't know who I am by now, my name is David. I also go by Miller Football. And today we're going to be continuing my series where I'm talking about all 32 teams and what they've done during free agency, the first week, stage, wave, whatever you want to call it. The most important part of free agency is over. So I'm going through division by division, grading each team based upon their additions, their losses, and their retentions. Before we jump into this, keep in mind that when I'm recording these, I'm dealing with a stuffy nose and some allergy symptoms. So if I sound a little bit off, I do apologize, but I'm working my ass off to try to get these done because people said they wanted them broken up into, a division by division breakdown instead of two big videos, one big video, whatever. So we're working. These are going to be my primary uploads over the next couple days. But with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it. Starting out with the Denver Broncos, this is a team that really didn't have a fun free agency. They didn't have the money to go out, spend a bunch of cap on some new flashy toys or anything like that. Instead, they kind of looked at free agency this year as, you know what? We are just going to shed some bad contracts, part ways with some guys that aren't working out for us, and start to kind of build this team the way Sean Payton wants to, make some pretty simple moves. Nothing too crazy, and that's perfectly okay. The draft and 2025 for free agency are going to be much, much more exciting, most likely, for the Denver Broncos. But taking a look at what they actually did in free agency, my favorite move they made, obviously, is retaining Michael Burton, who is pretty comfortably the best fullback in this division at this point. And we'll talk about the other teams and what their fullback situation is. But Burton, he's got that familiarity with Sean Payton. Brought him in last year after, Peyton and Burton had spent some time with the Saints, and Burton was bouncing around. Ironically, had been with the Chiefs beforehand. And he's proven to be a rather solid contributor, not someone you're going to trust with the ball in his hands very often. He does get those short yardage carries, which is what he's built for. But he's been a very good movable offensive blocker, playing fullback, H-back, a little wing back, a little tight end, He's done it all in that offense, and then he's also been a very solid special teams contributor, and Denver's special teams was much better last year than it had been in recent years, so Burton is definitely part of that. He's a very capable special teams player, so I love keeping him around. And then some of the other, bigger names, I guess you could say, that they kept around. Adam Troutman gets a 2-year deal, and he was their most reliable tight end last year. Hopefully Greg Dulcich will be okay after getting hurt last year. But Troutman came in, had 22 receptions, 3 touchdowns, was just a solid contributor in an offense that really lacked solid contributors. And, he's a really, really solid, inline tight end, solid blocker. Especially with Chris Manhertz being gone, you need to make sure you have a blocking tight end on the roster. So I like Troutman sticking around in Denver. Obviously also has familiarity with Sean Payton from their time in New Orleans together. So keeping him around, can't complain there. And then the other big retention in my eyes was Will Lutz keeping around their kicker, someone else who has familiarity with Sean Payton. You're noticing a little pattern here. He's not the best kicker in the world, but he was very consistent. He was definitely very consistent. He was 30 of 34 last year. He ended up almost signing with the Jaguars, came back to Denver. Not a lot of risk with this move or anything like that. Nothing negative to say. Just keeping around a consistent kicker, that your coach seems to like is always a good thing. And then other retentions, just to get them out of the way. Lil Jordan Humphrey gave him a veteran minimum, sure. Justin Sternat, who I'm not going to pretend to be super familiar with. But when you lose Josie Jewell, it's good to keep around as many of your linebackers as you can. They added one, and we'll talk about that. And then you've also got, Drew Sanders that can come in and play. So I don't know how much of a role he'll actually have on the team. Maybe he's a special teams guy. Again, I'm not super familiar with his games. You'll have to excuse me. And then you also make sure to keep around PJ Locke, which is definitely a smart move considering that you're letting go of Justin Simmons, and we'll talk about that. But he's just somebody that's been in the defense, somebody that's familiar with your team, a veteran, not a starter, but a solid depth, a safety. I'm a little upset because he takes maybe some reps away from JL Skinner, some attention away from JL Skinner, and I'm a big JL Skinner fan, but, I get it. You want to keep your guys around. And then you take a look at the third-party additions they made. The first and biggest of which I would say is probably Josh Reynolds, who's going to come in on a 2-year, $14 million deal. And look, I'm going to say this might be a bit of a hot take, but I think Josh Reynolds is a better receiver than Jerry Jeudy, because at least Josh Reynolds cares. At least Josh Reynolds tries, and I like the role he's going to fit in this offense a lot, being the number 2 receiver behind Courtland Sutton. You're going to have Marvin Mims, hopefully step up. So you've got yourself a nice little receiver core there, especially if Tim Patrick isn't able to come back. Having a guy like Reynolds that is just kind of become a consistent, solid receiver is definitely a good move. And then the other big third-party addition they made was adding Brandon Jones on a 3-year deal. And he's more of a box safety type guy. And, traditionally, but last year Vic Fangio kind of changed that a little bit, had him play a little bit further back. He had 2 interceptions. He's not Justin Simmons, but he's a versatile safety that can play a bunch of different roles for you in the secondary, and it doesn't hurt to have a guy like that at all. So when you have your safety core of Stearns, Jones, Locke, Skinner, Turner, Yell, like that's a solid group of 5. I like that, and maybe they make an addition there at safety still. I don't think they will. I think they're going to try to make Stearns and Jones work, see what they have there, and worst comes to worst, you can throw PJ Locke in there. What else did they do here? Well, they add in Matt Pert and Calvin Throckmorton. And sure, they're just some solid depth linemen. Neither one is truly a starter. Pert's more of your swing tackle. Throckmorton has that familiarity with Sean Payton once again, so he's just a good backup lineman. You also add in Sam Mustipher, who, as a Bears fan, I really just want to sit here and say, this is terrible, you're idiots for trying to give him money, blah, blah, blah. He was okay in Baltimore. He was okay. He wasn't good. He wasn't great, but he was okay. He was capable. And as probably going to be your backup center, as of right now, ESPN has Luke Wattenberg listed as your starter. And I've watched this center class. I like quite a few of the guys in it. Maybe the Broncos draft a guy and kind of let Wattenberg and Mustipher hold the reins until they get a rookie that they like, that they can develop and see if he can step in. And they also have Alex Forsythe I forgot about. I liked him coming out. So you have options at center. I'm just hopeful that Sam Mustipher won't start for you guys, because you definitely wouldn't want to have that. And on the defensive side of the ball, you bring in Malcolm Roach, who, once again, reuniting with Sean Payton. He's not an elite player or anything, but he's very, very solid. He was a UDFA in 2020. And when you're losing guys like Mike Purcell and, defensive tackle is one of your biggest needs, just getting a really nice rotational player that has a lot of experience and knows Sean Payton, obviously, is a very good move. Roach is absolutely fine. He's a very solid rotational player, so can't complain there. And then you bring in Cody Barton to kind of be the competition for, Josie Jewell's replacement. Him and Drew Sanders, kind of like your top 2 candidates there. Sure, and also Jonas Griffith coming off a torn ACL. Completely forgot about that, but you needed somebody. Barton is a very solid linebacker. Again, he's one of those guys that isn't a superstar, but he's certainly capable. He's a plug-and-play starter. He's not going to be someone that's going to change a game for you, but he had like 120 tackles last year. He has a nose for the ball. He's smart. He's just going to serve as a very solid cog in the machine, and that's all you need him to be. So that's great. So that's it for their additions and their retentions. Going over to their losses, Russell Wilson, Jerry Jeudy. I don't see either one of those as a real loss. I think they're both addition by subtraction. Russell Wilson, he was eating up a ton of cap space. Sure, you have to eat some dead cap, but he just wasn't working. Jerry Jeudy, I'm not a fan of. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on him, you can go check out the AFC North video I did. I talked about him with the Browns. Maybe there's something there still. I don't know. It wasn't working in Denver. You had to move off. And then Chris Manhertz, like I said, you need a blocking tight end. As of right now, what's your tight end room? You've got Troutman and Dulcich and a couple guys that I've never heard of, Kroll and Adkins. So Troutman is a very solid blocking tight end and can kind of fill the blocking hole left by Manhertz, and maybe you go out and draft or sign a blocking tight end. They're not super hard to come by as just like a depth guy, so we'll have to see what the plan is there. And then defensively, Josie Jewell is kind of the big name here, other than Justin Simmons, obviously, and we'll talk about him in a second. But like in terms of after Simmons, Josie Jewell is a big name here. But you brought in Cody Barton. He's capable. Drew Sanders, you're hoping he can turn into something. So I think you'll be okay. And then Justin Simmons. Look, it's tough because he's one of the best safeties in the league. But considering age and contract and like the timeline of this team, so to speak, because like they're not competing right now. You still got to figure out what you're doing at quarterback. I get it. I get not keeping him around. I absolutely understand it. I'm sure it sucks as a Broncos fan, but it is what it is. So other than that, all these other defensive losses, not a big deal. Just kind of rotational role players that you can absolutely replace. You'll be all right. So as a whole, I think Denver did pretty okay. Again, this wasn't a super flashy offseason. They didn't have a bunch to do. It was mostly just clearing out some cap, or clearing out some bad contracts, eating some dead cap, and kind of bringing in some of Sean Payton's guys, I guess. But I'm going to give them a B. I think they did fine. This is one of those offseasons that was very baseline. Nothing offensively bad, nothing outstanding. But I will say, again, they have the best fullback in the division. That's something I'm a big fan of. They were one of two teams in this division to make sure they took care of the fullback position this offseason. And the draft is going to be very, very interesting for them. I know I've said that about a lot of teams, but considering where they're sitting and their need at quarterback, they could be a trade-up candidate. They could be a take Bo Nix at 12 candidate. They're one of the teams that I'm really intrigued to see how they're going to attack the quarterback position in the draft, because they are in a very, very odd spot. But I think they have enough talent to where if they drafted a quarterback, they would be in an okay spot to develop one. Jumping over to the Kansas City Chiefs, the big thing for them this offseason was making sure you retain the top two free agents you were going to have in L'Jarius Sneed and Chris Jones. And in my opinion, they retain the more important of those two, so I see that as a win, giving Chris Jones a massive deal. He gets a 5-year deal that includes $95 million guaranteed. And look, now that Aaron Donald's retired, and maybe even the last year or two of Aaron Donald's career, he's been the best interior defensive lineman in the sport, right? He has been the centerpiece of their defense. We saw how they struggled early in the year when he was holding out. We know how big of an impact he has on this team. So keeping him around had to be their number one priority. It was. Chris Jones is incredible. I'm glad they got that figured out. I'm glad they got him paid. That might ruffle some feathers because I know a lot of people don't support the Chiefs and don't want to see the Chiefs continue to be good, but I have fun with dynasties, especially considering I'm a Bears fan and my team's never good enough to compete with them. I like watching them from the outside. So I like that they were able to keep around Chris Jones. They also made quite a few retentions defensively. I've got Mike Pennell and Mike Dana up here as kind of the two most notable ones, or at least my two favorite ones. Mike Pennell, your big run stuffer. Mike Dana, your kind of do-it-all defensive end that's been incredibly consistent. They also keep around a couple other defensive players, like I said, and Tershawn Wharton, Derek Nottie, Drew Tranquill. Just all really solid role players for their defense. None of them are big names. None of them are superstars. But they do their job, and they do it really well. And, I made a video about, cheap plug here, I made a video about their performance in the Super Bowl, mentioned a lot of these guys by name. I went into that, I was going to make a Leo Chanel video. And I was really excited to be like, yeah, Leo Chanel had this great game. And then as I kept watching the All-22, it was like, wow, there are a lot of guys that no one talks about stepping up here, making big tackles for a loss, flying into the backfield and bringing down Brock Purdy, stopping runs at the line of scrimmage. Like, there were just a lot of really underrated contributors on the Chiefs Super Bowl team last year. And other than Willie Gay and Sneed, they kept all of them. And, other than Willie Gay and Sneed is a tough pill to swallow. Gay, a little bit less so, because Drew Tranquill can step in for him. Or I guess Drew Tranquill wouldn't be stepping in for him. It would be Leo Chanel would get an increased role with Gay gone. So then you've got Chanel, Tranquill, and Nick Bolton, which is one hell of a linebacker group. Tranquill's one of the more underrated linebackers in the sport. And like I said, the other defensive linemen, Pennell, Dana, Nottie, Wharton, very, very underrated defensive linemen in their own right. Deion Bush, I have a little bit of bias towards Bears bias. Used to play for the Bears, love the guy, but he's made some plays for the Chiefs too. So I love that they really went hard in retaining their defense, because I know they have Mahomes, defense wins championships. That's the oldest thing in the book. It stands true. It stands the test of time. And one of the big reasons why the Chiefs were able to beat the 49ers in the Super Bowl last year is because of how good their defense was. And then on the offensive side of the ball, they've made some really interesting moves. The first of which I have highlighted here is Marquise Brown. And, that's awesome. Marquise Brown's not an incredible receiver. He's a really solid number 2, a good speedster, a good deep threat, so to speak. So I like bringing him in. They needed something. They haven't had like a true consistent downfield threat not named Travis Kelce since Tyreek Hill. And now they have one, right? You lose MVS, you lose Hardman, you replace him with Marquise Brown. That's great work. And this move, I mean, the implications and the impact only gets amplified when you see what's going on with Rashee Rice right now. You want to make sure Mahomes has something, right? And if your receiver room next year, you don't add in Marquise Brown, you kept around MVS and Hardman, for example. Running into the season with those two, maybe Rashee Rice, I don't know how that's all going to get handled. I don't know if there will be a suspension or not. And then like Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore, that would be bad process. So bringing in Brown to at least make a splash at receiver is great. Gives you a great deep threat, like I said. Lets them kind of focus on maybe more of like an X receiver in the draft. Like a big body guy to play on the outside. I think that Mahomes really hasn't had a true X in Kansas City. Like a good X. Tyreek Hill wasn't that. The closest thing he's had is Travis Kelce, and he doesn't play like an X receiver. He plays like a jumbo slot. So they need one of those guys, and I think it'll be really interesting to see them get a really good one in this deep receiver class to pair with Brown and Kelce. And then we go over to the other big offensive move they made, and adding in Louis Rees-Zammit from rugby. I don't know what team he played for off the top of my head, and I'm sure I wouldn't know how to pronounce it if I did, and I don't want to butcher it. I don't want to upset anyone over in the UK. But, Welsh guy, only 23, 6'3", 194 pounds, so good size on him. Coming into play an offensive weapon position. He's technically listed at running back, but when the move first got announced, it said he would play running back, receiver, bunch of different stuff. So that's exciting. The Chiefs, like I was saying with Marquise Brown, you got to get weapons around Mahomes, and if you can't do it the traditional way, why not try something different? He had a couple teams that were interested, so sure, we'll see if it works out for him. Quick Wikipedia search will tell you he played wing and fullback, not real fullback, but full dash back. So certainly, if he played a position called fullback, he can't be bad. Certainly, this won't turn out like Jared Hayne for the 49ers, who, real quick, we'll do this live. I'm curious as to what he's been up to, because I totally forgot he existed until I was doing a little bit of research for this video. So Jared Hayne, oh no. Oh no. Yeah, never mind. Don't look up Jared Hayne. Don't do that. That's not, no. Oh my. Jared Hayne should never be spoken of again. I hope Louis Rees-Zammit can be better than Jared Hayne, so he can be the guy we think of when we think rugby converted to the NFL, because, oh my God, that's awful. Moving off of that and looking at the other offensive moves they made, they bring in Carson Wentz and Irv Smith, who both solid depth. Wentz can be a solid backup, better than who was a Blaine Gabbert they had beforehand. And Irv Smith, good blocker if nothing else, so you'll take that. And they also retain Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who, I don't know, I know he's not good, but part of me wants him to be and is like weirdly attached to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So I'm very in favor of bringing him in, keeping him around rather. Probably wouldn't have been as high on a team bringing him in now that I think about it, but keeping him around, I can get behind it as your second running back. And then special teams moves, obviously can't forget about those. They keep around their long snapper, James Winchester. Love to see that. Got to keep around your special teamers. And then at punter, they make a big move. They let go of Tommy Townsend, who's been one of the league's better punters over the past few years. And they bring in Matt Ariza, who, is officially getting back into the league. And so moving off of that and looking at their losses, nothing here other than L'Jarius Sneed is a huge deal. It sucks they couldn't keep around Sneed, because that cornerback room that they were building up, or that secondary in general, they were building up with McDuffie and Reed and Cook and Shamari Connor and Deion Bush. that not being intact anymore, I don't know why that was so hard for me to think of to say, that sucks. You know, the Chiefs secondary just got worse. And honestly, I know a lot of people have been mocking them to take a receiver in the first round, which is very understandable. I wouldn't be shocked if they were aggressive and jumped up for a corner, you know, just to get somebody opposite McDuffie, or, you know, just to get a good outside corner. A guy like Kool-Aid McKinstry started to fall, or, you know, if someone like Quinion Mitchell fell into the late teens, or, you know, if they like a guy like Terrion Arnold or Nate Wiggins or whoever, I could see them, maybe not Terrion Arnold, because I think he projects a little bit better as a nickel, but, you know, if one of the top corners starts to fall or one falls to them, I could absolutely see them making that type of move. You know, it's probably not as exciting as getting Mahomes a big name weapon, but it's a deep receiver class. It's much deeper than it is at corner. So I would like to see them do that, honestly, if they can get their hands on one of the top guys. But other than that, like, losing Willie Gay, that sucks, but you'll be able to stomach it because, like I said, you've still got Tranquil and Bolton and Leo Chanel, so you'll be okay. So I can't get upset at any of that, right? Snead's the only big loss they suffered. I also don't like cutting Tommy Townsend, but, you know, they're trying something different at punter, and we'll have to see how that works out for them, right? So as a whole, Chiefs had a good offseason. They retained a lot of talent. They added in a really solid weapon for Mahomes, maybe two really solid weapons for Mahomes, depending on what this rugby fella does. So I'm going to give them an A-. I would have given them an A if I had made this, you know, the week after free agency had started like I planned to, because L'Jarius Sneed would still be on the roster. But losing Sneed does knock their grade a little bit, because that is a pretty significant loss. But otherwise, they did everything right. They extended Jones. They got Mahomes some weapons. They kept around all their big defensive pieces. They didn't lose anything big other than Sneed. So I like their free agency a lot. And like I said, watch for them to trade up in the first round and maybe try to grab a corner to replace Sneed. That's one of my early day of draft takes that'll happen, not regarding a team drafting a specific player. There's a lot of hoops to jump around with that one, but just roll with it. Moving over to the Las Vegas Raiders, this team did not do a whole lot, so we don't have a lot to talk about. Let's go ahead and jump into it. Big move by far. They give Christian Wilkins a bag. He gets a 4-year, $110 million deal with just under, $85 million guaranteed. And yeah, I mean, he deserves it. When this first came out, I was a little hesitant because I thought that was a lot of money for Christian Wilkins. But when you see what type of contracts the other defensive tackles in the league are getting, you know, it makes sense. And I should have realized at the time that that's the direction we were heading. That was a mistake on my part. But this is an awesome move. Like, this is just a really fun move. Christian Wilkins is a menace on the interior of the defensive line, and you pair him with Max Crosby, and then a hybrid of Malcolm Kuntz and Tyree Wilson. Hopefully Tyree Wilson gets his shit figured out, because he's making me look really bad right now for being a big fan of his. But no, in all seriousness, like, this is an awesome move. I feel like it kind of goes without saying. If you want to see a film breakdown of Christian Wilkins and how good he's been playing, I definitely recommend watching my buddy No Huddle NFL. He just made a film breakdown talking about what Christian Wilkins brings to the Raiders defense, and he put it a lot better than I could have. So I'm going to drop a link in the description to that. Maybe put one of those cards if I remember. But hop over there, let him know I sent you, so I can revel in the fact that I'm giving him clout. But in all seriousness, like, Christian Wilkins, awesome move. Also on the defensive line, they retain Adam Butler, who, not a big name, but he stepped up at the end of the year last year. He really came into his own in the last couple games. He had 5 sacks last year, 3 of which came in the last 3 games, and was a very serviceable, solid, rotational defensive lineman. As of right now, I think he's listed as their second starter. No, he's not. It's still John Jenkins. So he's still listed as a rotational defensive lineman for them. Will probably stay in that role, and he fits in that role very well. I like that move quite a bit. They also brought back John Jenkins, who is just a solid defensive lineman. Nothing crazy, but somebody that you can feel comfortable rotating in and out with Butler. And then the other, like, big move they made was they re-sign Andre James. He gets a 3-year, $24 million deal with $16 million guaranteed. He's been really good for them. They finally have a consistent center, something they haven't had since Rodney Hudson in, 2020? 2021 is when James took over. He's really, really good at what he does. 96.5% pass block win rate last year. Had a 70.1% run block win rate. 2 penalties, a hold, a false start. Like, not bad statistically for an offensive lineman by any means. So I like that move a lot for them, keeping him around. Then they also bring in Gardner Minshew, who stepped up last year for the Colts in Anthony Richardson's absence. He gets a 2-year, $25 million deal with $15 guaranteed. Very good bridge quarterback. The Raiders, they're a team that's going to want to be competitive even if they're developing a rookie quarterback, just because that's kind of Antonio Pierce's MO. So Minshew gives you that opportunity while still serving as like somebody that, if you have a rookie that's starting to impress you in camp, you don't feel bad about putting Minshew on the bench. So I like that move for them a lot as well. I think too, especially if they don't get to draft a quarterback this year, which is also very possible, then Minshew can serve as a good starter for this year, and then next year you can turn your attention to drafting a quarterback, or whatever your plan is. So the Minshew move gives you a little bit of flexibility at the quarterback position as well, provide you with a solid starter. I like it. And then they also bring in Alexander Mattison to just kind of be their other running back. They've got Zamir White, Madison, Abdullah, who they also retain. Abdullah, more of a special teams guy, but we'll take reps on offense, obviously. So Madison and White is a pretty okay duo. It's not great, but it's pretty okay. I would like to see them maybe draft a running back in this class. I mentioned it in the last video. As I'm watching more of this class, I think it's a little bit underrated. So if they can go out and there's a running back in this class they like, I would really like to see them add whoever it is in this room with Madison and White. But Madison's a solid RB2, capable pass blocker, had some fumble issues early in the year last year, but he cleaned those up. So he's not like a star running back, obviously, but he's very capable. He's very solid in doing what he does. So can't complain there. Then you also bring in Harrison Bryant, who serves as a very, very solid tight end too, behind your second-year tight end, Michael Mayer. You lose Austin Hooper, and Bryant and Hooper are about equal in terms of talent level at this point. So I like that move. I think that's a solid replacement. So they did good in terms of adding and retaining talent. In terms of losing talent, whatever. There's no one here that I'm dropping to my knees like, Raiders, why? Except for Jakob Johnson. But even then, it doesn't seem like they care too much about having a fullback, as much as I hate to say it. Doesn't look like it's Antonio Pierce's thing, which sucks because he's trying to bring back the Raider way and trying to play hard-nosed football. How the fuck are you going to do that without a fullback? The Raiders are one of the better all-time fullback teams, and you're going to sit here and tell me you're going to bring back the Raider way with Marcel Reese in your front office, and you're not going to have a fullback to show for it? Come on now. Now, maybe they want to go a different route at fullback. Maybe they got somebody in the draft they're looking at. They're like, yeah, this can be a convert, or yeah, this is a guy that we think can play fullback. And sure, if that's the case, fullbacks are fullbacks. All right, I'm not going to discriminate, but I hate seeing Jakob Johnson out of a job because he's such a good fullback. They also lose Josh Jacobs, who made up one of the better fullback running back tandems. Jacobs is fine. He's not an irreplaceable player. He's not somebody that has been super consistent throughout his career, not somebody that has been super productive outside of, last year? Not last year, the year before. So you'll live. You can stomach it. A group or a committee of Madison, White, and a rookie is about equal to what you're going to get out of Josh Jacobs. They cut Hunter Renfrow, which sucks, but we kind of knew that was coming. He didn't have much of a role in this offense at this point. It's also a deep receiver class, good opportunity to replace him. You lose Jermaine Eluemunor. You've got Thayer Munford to step in for him. You're hoping he can step up and be something. And then defensively, Tillery. Really? You want me to say something nice about Tillery? He's fine, but he's replaceable. Bilal Nichols, he's also replaceable, especially considering the money he just got paid. And of course, you brought in Christian Wilkins, so who needs a Bilal Nichols? And then Amik Robinson, I think you're okay. Nate Hobbs and Jack Jones were really solid last year. Jacorian Bennett, somebody I like quite a bit. So I think you'll be able to stomach losing him. So as a whole, I like what the Raiders did, and I'm going to be a little bit bold here. I'm going to give them an A. I think the Raiders did really, really good with what they had. The Christian Wilkins signing, in terms of the money, not the player, because I've always loved the player, but in terms of the money, has really grown on me. And they kept around all the guys that were super important for their offense, not named Jakob Johnson. And I'm not going to be an asshole and nick them for not keeping around their fullback that they weren't using last year. But they didn't lose anything big. They added in a competent quarterback, something they didn't have last year. Well, Aiden O'Connell had some flashes, but Minshew's comfortably better. And yeah, I think they did a really, really solid job. And I know I already said this with the Broncos, but it'll be really interesting to see how they attack the quarterback position, because they're another team that is in a weird limbo spot with drafting a quarterback. I don't think they would be as aggressive to trade up for one as the Broncos would be because they already have at least a competent quarterback on the roster, but we'll have to see. Crazier things have happened, and the Raiders might want to go crazy. We know they've done some wonky stuff in the first round throughout their history, so maybe this is another year where they decide to do that. And finally, with the Los Angeles Chargers, this is a team that is in a really weird spot. You go out, you get Jim Harbaugh, you get yourself a competent coach who just won a national championship. And you go into the offseason, everyone's expecting, okay, we're going to start to get some stuff going around Herbert. We're finally going to get something going. And walking out of free agency, Justin Herbert's wide receiver one is now Joshua Palmer. I'm going to let that sit for a second. Joshua Palmer is Justin Herbert's wide receiver one. Him or Quentin Johnston, who was not very good last year. So that's tough. The offense really took a hit. You lose Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and we'll talk about that. But where the offense got better is in the run game, which very Harbaugh, very Jim Harbaugh. Look at what he was doing at Michigan last year. His offense was Blake Corum and J.J. McCarthy every once in a while doing something. So you go out, you add Gus Edwards, who is not a superstar back by any means, but he doesn't have to be. He's the best runner of the football the Chargers have had since Melvin Gordon? They have not had a good, pure runner of the football in a while. Austin Eckler was not a good, pure runner of the football. Okay, he was a good pass catcher, he was a good scat back, but you couldn't rely on Austin Eckler to pick up tough yardage. You couldn't rely on Austin Eckler to run between the tackles. You couldn't rely on Austin Eckler in the run game at all. Gus Edwards might not be as athletic or as big of a name as Eckler, but you can rely on him in the run game a hell of a lot more. So I love bringing in Gus Edwards. I think that's the perfect replacement for Eckler. You go the total opposite direction at running back. I think that's great. Then they also bring in Ben Mason, who is a weird projection at fullback because, or at least in terms of what he's done in the NFL. I won't lie, I'm not super familiar with his college ability, like what he did at Michigan, because that was a little bit before my time of scouting. So you'll have to excuse me there. But in terms of what he's done in the NFL at fullback, it's nothing. And it's not because he's inherently bad at it or anything like that. It's just that he's playing behind Pat Ricard, so he doesn't get on the field on offense. He's just played special teams. Now, judging by the way Jim Harbaugh ran his offense last year, you're going to use a fullback. They had Max Bredesen, who was a tight end that got converted to fullback. He kicked ass there. It's very unfortunate he's not coming out because I'm sure Harbaugh would have went out of his way to get him to make sure he's on the roster. So instead you get Ben Mason, different Michigan alum. And I'm excited to see how this is going to play out for them because the Chargers, they had Xander Horvath. They ended up getting rid of him. He's now on the Saints. He's bounced around a little bit, even though he had a really good rookie season with the Chargers, both in terms of blocking and in terms of being a little bit of a weapon out of the backfield. Now, I don't foresee Ben Mason doing any of that. I don't think he's going to be someone you're going to be throwing the ball out of the backfield to a whole lot. And I'd love to be wrong, but I just don't think that's his game. I think he's just going to be more of a traditional hand-in-the-dirt fullback. Maybe play like a H-back every once in a while, because technically he is listed as a fullback / tight end. But, judging by what I've seen out of him on special teams, he's got strong legs, he's got strong hands. His vision seems to be good when he's zigging and zagging, trying to find his way to the returner. So, maybe there's something there. I'm really excited to see how that's going to work out for him. That's going to be one of the more fun storylines for me personally to follow. I know nobody cares about that, and I've spent way too much time talking about Ben Mason, but I am excited. So let me have it. And then in terms of other third-party additions, you bring in Bradley Bozeman, who's a very solid, just plug-and-play center. You need somebody to step in because Corey Linsley, he's coming off, dealing with a little bit of a heart issue and, was on IR most of last year. They just restructured his contract. He's probably heading towards retirement. So it's good to have some sort of insurance, right? Definitely good to go out and get a guy like Bozeman. And then on the other side of the ball, you go out and you bring in Christian Fulton on a 1-year prove-it deal. And that's a pretty solid move. Fulton has some upside there. He's still only 25. And you had to bring in somebody after you let Michael Davis go. So I like it. Very low risk, potential high reward. I think that can be a solid signing for them. And then they also retained a pretty big piece of their defense in Alohi Gilman, who is one of those guys that I've always been a fan of. It's one of those weird things where I had him in Madden one year on a franchise, He played really well for me, so I became a fan of him. It's one of those weird things that, like, you know, fans of my generation experience, where you'll have a random player in Madden and you start to become a fan of them in real life because of that. Alohi Gilman's been one of those guys for me. He's coming off the best season of his career by far. First year as a starter, had, 2 interceptions, 10 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles, didn't play in 3 games, so managed to do all that in spite of missing 3 games, and he played 8 games with a brace, so he was doing all that despite having, you know, being a little bit banged up. He gets a 2-year, $11 million deal, not a whole lot committed there. I think that's a really solid move. Then taking a look at some of the other moves here, you retain John Jenkins and Easton Stick. Solid depth, sure. You add in Will Dissly, who's a very solid blocking tight end, somebody that I'm sure Jim Harbaugh was pounding the table to bring in. You know, he gets a 3-year deal, so I like that move a lot. He gets, $10 million guaranteed over those 3 years. I think that's a great move. And then Hayden Hurst is going to step in and be your Gerald Everett replacement. You're more your receiving tight end. He's solid. He's capable. I like it. You bring in Poona Ford, who's a very good run stopper, very wide run stopper. I was going to say big, but he's such a weird build. He's really short, but really wide, and he's really good at playing nose tackle. He's one of those random players that I'm a big fan of, just like Gilman. You bring in Troy Dye to be your linebacker special teams replacement for the 2 guys you lost, Tanner Muse and Amon, who I'm not going to attempt to say the last name of. I know he signed with my Bears, but I still haven't learned his last name. Don't judge me. And then you also bring back Denzel Perryman, who started his career in LA and went to Houston, comes back. He's a very, very solid run stopper and will kind of come in and replace Eric Kendricks, be a good starter next to, I guess it's Nick Neiman as of right now. I'd like to see Diane Henley step up. I liked him a decent bit coming out of the draft, so I think they could be a solid tandem. Henley is more of your coverage guy. Perryman is more of your run stopper. I think that could be pretty solid. And then in terms of losses, really this wouldn't be so bad if they didn't completely overhaul their offensive weapons. Right? Eckler, I don't care about losing. Like I said, he's not a good runner. You lose a little bit in the passing game, but you can replace that with like a 5th rounder, right? What Eckler brings to your team is not that valuable. But trading away Keenan Allen, cutting Mike Williams, not re-signing Jalen Guyton, and not re-signing Gerald Everett kind of hurts, because Everett's better than Hurst. You know, Hurst is a fine enough replacement, so that one's kind of the lesser part. But Guyton, Williams, and Allen, losing those 3 receivers really sucks, especially Allen and Williams. Now, I get why you're doing it. You had to free up cap space, right? You had to make moves somewhere. Williams can't stay healthy. Keenan Allen's 32. I understand the moves. They're not wrong. You know, these are necessary cuts. But now you're left in a really tough spot. I am sure they're trending towards taking a receiver high. They've got the 5th overall pick. I know people keep mocking them to trade down. I don't think that's the case. There's a world where Marvin Harrison Jr. is sitting at number 5 and they make that move. They go out and they get Marv to pair with Justin Herbert if the Cardinals decide to trade down from 4. Or they could take Rome Odunze, or they could take Malik Neighbors, or they could get crazy and take Brock Bowers. Like, there's plenty of opportunities for them to get a legit weapon on offense in the draft. So I get it. It's still just tough to stomach looking at the Chargers depth chart right this second. And then defensively, I mean, Eric Kendricks is perfectly replaced by Perryman. Your 2 linebacker special teamers, you can replace them. Michael Davis, whatever. Kenneth Murray isn't that great. And Austin Johnson was more of just a depth defensive lineman. So as a whole, I think the Chargers did okay. You know, nothing to blow me away. And then trying to stomach those receiver losses is a little tough. So I'm going to give them a B-. Like, I like what their plan is here. They're very clearly setting up to go receiver in the draft. I feel like a lot of people have been overlooking that when you look at what the Chargers receiver room is. I think the Fulton move can be very sneakily good if he can play up to, you know, kind of what they're giving him a year to prove. And Edwards and Mason, I love bringing them over because your run game is going to be tough. And we know Jim Harbaugh loves himself a tough run game. But anyways, folks, that's going to do it for this installment of my grading every team 1 week into free agency series. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, please make sure to leave a like down below, as it does help out the channel a ton, shows your support, shows you care. I really appreciate it. And also make sure to subscribe, because if I haven't covered your team yet, you won't want to miss when I do. And if I have covered your team already, go ahead and subscribe anyways, because we've got more great NFL content coming your way all the way throughout the offseason, into the regular season, and beyond. We're going to be talking about the draft. We're going to be talking about all the teams again after the draft. We're going to be talking about all the teams again throughout the summer. mixed in with some film breakdowns and whatnot. You definitely won't want to miss that. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought about my grades for these teams. Was I a little too high on some players? Was I a little too low? Was I too harsh? Was I too kind? Anything in between? Please let me know down in the comments what you think. I'd love to sit and chat with you about what's going on around the league. But with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed. And to everyone out there watching, I hope you all have a wonderful day, evening, night, afternoon, whatever time of day it is for you. I hope you enjoy it because you're all wonderful people and you deserve it.
Had a chance on the throwback.
This was an ill-advised throw. What an unbelievable catch by Cole Kmet. And he cups it too. No movement when he hits the ground, tucked up against his shoulder. Wow.
Using that